Yeah, go for it. Let's knock it out.
Yeah. So on your go.
All right then. Hey everyone, this is Chris Chiu from Arnis International, also known as the Martial Arts Nomad, here with a friend of mine whom I've only known from the internet, which means he's always the best type of friends to have. Coach Kurt, all the way from Homer, Alaska. How's it going, brother?
Going. It's going well. I have early morning coffee, so
Oh yeah,
yeah, it's good.
it's 11 o'clock over there, or like 10:30 right now, right? Kind of.
Yeah, yeah. I say early, but yeah.
What time did you get up?
Like 8ish, I think. I don't know. It's summer in Alaska, so it's just we sleep whenever we can, I guess.
So, funny story. I've been to Alaska once, but I don't think I went to Homer. So maybe you can tell me how far away I was. I went to Anchorage and I went to Barrow. Where in the
Barrow's
lake?
way Barrow's way up north. Anchorage is smack dab in the center of Alaska, although it is like the furthest point from Alaska because it's basically Los Angeles of Alaska, so we don't really count it.
The tourist spot
Anchorage,
of Alaska.
yeah, so it's like it is the big city of Alaska, and it's directly north of Homer. It's about a couple hundred miles north of us. It's at least a 4 hour drive. So
Okay.
yeah,
Well, this is a fun idea. We've talked about talking a little bit for a little bit now, ever since we started communicating on some other pages,
yeah,
and I was like, well, you're probably not going to come to Orlando anytime soon. I
probably
can't
not.
afford to go to Alaska right now. So how am I
Yeah,
going to get you in the car? And you're like, I've got a great idea. Let's do it this way. I'm like, sweet. Not only is this the first ever remote Karpool Kali, it's also the first ever across the country Karpool Kali.
nerds will find a way, my friend. Nerds will find a way.
And that's that's how it should be. We
Yeah,
find solutions to problems we didn't think we'd have.
yeah.
Well, so you've seen the show a couple times. You know how this works. I don't tell the guest any ahead of time what the question will be, what the topic will be. I don't do those types of things because I feel spontaneity is the best way to go.
Yeah.
But first, real quick, just because some of my followers might not be aware of who you are, give us a brief background in your martial arts, how long you've been doing it, et cetera, et cetera.
Long
What's
story
what,
short,
what's the chicken all about? You know.
yeah. I'll start with the rubber clucker. The rubber clucker is a big part of my sense of humor. It's been always a thing with me. What it has turned into with regards to Filipino martial arts and just self defense and combatives is it is my medium to bridge uncomfortable subjects, difficult things, because let's face it, we deal with knives, stabbing people, and there's a lot of death involved. So Rubber Chicken allows me to bridge the gap to talk about uncomfortable things and uncomfortable truths while displaying skill, but with a sense of humor. So it helps disarm a lot of the intensity and it helps like to disarm a lot of like the scariness that is can be perceived within the Filipino martial arts. So there's that. As for martial arts, I've been involved with martial arts for 30 plus years. I'm actually a lineage holder of a system called LFS or LFA. Um, it is a obscure American combative system, but it also has ties to the Filipino martial arts. My adopted grandfather. So by the way, I'm adopted. My adopted grandfather was a World War II Marine Raider. Went from Guadalcanal to Iwo Jima, then to Burma, and somewhere along the way he picked up some form of Filipino martial arts blade work. So mainly the single knife. Brought it back, taught to my father, my uncles. Did not give any like the names or the cultural nuances to Filipino martial arts, and yeah, I learned it from there. I was at a taekwondo school when I was 12, and there was a Filipino man who apparently was a modern Arnis black belt, so that's a fun one to get
Oh,
into. Yeah,
cool.
yeah. So he saw me playing with sticks, knives, and swords, and was like, "Oh, you're Filipino. I'm Filipino. You should know what FMA is." And like, I had no idea. So from there, that's where I started picking up the double stick, more emphasis on single stick, and just had like uh, the awareness of what FMA actually is. But I had already been doing boxing, taekwondo, kempo, shorty foot kung fu, so wide variety of stuff. Then fought as semi-pro in boxing and taekwondo, getting ready for like things like Muay Thai and professional fights. got injured, went off to the Army, got introduced to modern Army combatives, became an instructor. Also got involved with Krav Maga pretty heavily, and also got involved with Jiu-Jitsu. So, and then when I got out of the Army, opened up a gym up here in Alaska, coached MMA and boxing for semi-pro and pro fighters, and yeah, had the only like major martial arts academy here on the Southern Peninsula, but that's not really saying much because there's only like a town of 5,000 here in Homer. But I mean, we had like 300 people on the books locally and online. So yeah, long story short, there's a couple other interesting nuances in there, but in the all of it, I did shut my gym down in 2019 because some serious health issues. But yeah, that's the long and short of it.
Well, first and foremost, thank you for your service for this country, and thank you for your service in the military, my friend.
Thank you.
How long were you in?
I was in for 11 years. I enlisted when I was 19, got out in 2016. So started off as a reservist. I started off as a 25 uniform, so a communications nerd. And then when I was with the Alaska National Guard, I got pencil whipped into an 11 Bravo slot. So I ended as infantry, but I really wasn't infantry. I was basically doing the same thing. It's just we had a change of MTO, which basically just the unit manning roster. So to stay within the unit, everybody had to be 11 Bravo. So I was in the process of transitioning over. But realistically, I got out. So I couldn't be in two places at once because I had my gym. And to be successful in the Guard, especially as a non-commissioned officer, you have to do way more than just be there 1 weekend a month. I spent time on active duty and spent some time overseas. Nothing cool, but I mean, I had a mediocre career, thankfully. So, yeah.
Well, so you very interesting background and lineage, but I just thought of a different question that I think would be a fun topic for us to get into, because we both laughed, we both joked, and I think that one of the things we've both agreed with from our earlier conversations on Facebook Messenger, you are not a fan of people who take the stick in FMA and have it up their butt.
Yeah,
you're not a fan of those guys who are like that, and I love the idea of someone intentionally breaking down those walls using a rubber chicken. My dad always said the purpose of seminars is not to intimidate and to scare people. The purpose of teaching is not to make everyone feel inferior. You should make everyone feel like they're enjoying themselves.
Yeah.
So that's how I run my classes. If people aren't laughing at my classes, I'm doing something wrong, in my opinion. And I think we both can talk about that part of the seriousness of FMA. I feel like needs to. It's almost toxic to the culture in some ways.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, online personalities really, or like online personas really encourages like a sense of negativity. So like in the other side of it, as my reemergence to social media and being involved with the wider Filipino martial arts community online, my intention and in practice, and also a big part of my recovery, is being intentionally mindful and positive and supportive, because there's so much vitriol and negativity online anyway. So it's like, if I'm going to be there and be a troll, then why the hell am I online? So if I'm going to post anything, I want it to be thought-provoking and positive. If I'm going to comment on anything, even if I disagree with it, I'm still going to be supportive of anybody who has got the bravery to put content out there, who could be subject to all the ridicule and just all that garbage that's online. So with that, I support anybody who puts stuff out there, and I want to be positive and I want to be helpful in that regard, because the internet is full of just garbage. So it just is. And garbage human beings just out there trying to like play on people's emotions negatively, so it makes them feel better. And it's the worst form of narcissism overall, is that you get off on being mean to people online. So yeah.
What did your idea of the chicken thing and making things less serious and making things fun, so to speak, did that come from a bad experience you faced, or is this something you noticed about the culture and you're like, you know what, I'm going to change that?
Yeah, it's kind of it's one of those chicken and the egg situations where I've always had a rubber chicken involved with anything that I do. So like a lot of the original video work that I had with rubber chicken, it dates all the way back to like 2016, some of it down to 2018 when I had the gym and was starting to put content out. Then I've just kind of like grew with it as I've come back. But really, I mean, taking a cue from Master Ken, because Master Ken is a genius. Anybody who doesn't understand Master Ken needs to really pay attention to Master Ken, because he's a legit martial artist.
Oh yeah.
He's got skill, and he pokes holes at all the uncomfortable things that is particular to our community. So with that, I took a real note from him of like, hey, demonstrate skill, talk about something uncomfortable, and yeah, and play with it. So I lost you there. It looks like it froze. Hopefully it comes back. Looks like you froze. This is what I get about talking about Master Ken online, and it freezes and he goes away. Lost you
Hey,
there.
can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Yep. So one of the problems with my show idea, I use a stand in my car, and it is summertime in Florida, and my phone overheated. So I'm going to hold the phone away from the sun as best I
Oh,
can.
nice.
So, but we were talking about something that was interesting. What were we talking about? I forget.
Talking about humor and the rubber chicken
Okay.
and taking a note from Master Ken. Really, I mean, the big thing I was getting at is Master Ken is a phenomenal martial artist in his own right. And he demonstrates skill, but he's able to talk about uncomfortable things and difficult things within our sphere of influence in our profession. And I took that note and ran with it with the rubber chicken because I mean FMA is full of just some very interesting content and personalities. So with that, with the rubber chicken is I can poke holes at the rhetoric and the dogma and some of the negative stereotypes that's particular to our art.
Which I think is so needed. I mean, we've we've both been around FMA for a little while now. We both see that there's so much positive things. There are so many great things about the culture and the art that we do, but there is still this. And I was talking to Jesse from FMA Pulse, and we were talking like the pool is so small. We can't afford to be divisive and manipulative and have the stick up our ass. We got to be
Yeah,
welcoming and inviting. You
yeah,
know,
absolutely.
Remy Prestos had a saying. My dad would say this year. He said years ago. My dad learned this from Remy. Remy says all the time. Remy would say, "Welcome everybody, no matter
Hmm.
what style, no matter what background." And part of that I think is because one, he was a great businessman, but two,
Hmm.
I've learned that one of the biggest things for Remy was that he hated conflict, which I'm learning is a lot of Filipino people don't like conflict,
Yeah,
which I find an interesting part of our, the culture of Filipino culture, when the art itself is such a dangerous combative art, but we don't like
yeah.
violence. We're very good at violence.
Well, I mean, it's that whole thing about I used to use quite a few like metaphors and just like anybody else with martial arts academy, but I would ask my students, why is a warrior polite? And the simple fact is, a warrior is polite because they don't want to have to engage in violence. So, like the thought process is, if I say something that's going to result in me getting hit in the face, I probably shouldn't say it. If I say something that's going to result in getting somebody else hit in the face, I probably shouldn't say it. So it's that whole like knowledge of self and skill set and capability keeps people humble. I mean, it's the whole thing of like an armed society is a polite society. I mean, there's a whole bunch of anecdotes and metaphors out there.
What's the other one that was big around? Better to be a warrior in the garden than a gardener in the war, or whatever.
Yeah, that kind of one. I mean, there's a lot of them out there, but realistically, it's bad for business and the aspect of a modern martial arts setting, especially in the West, if everybody's at each other's throats.
Oh, absolutely.
No.
And what was some of the what were some of the things you noticed? I mean, as a dojo runner, as a gym runner, which hats off to me, man. I got into work in commercial dojos. My dad's worked in fitness, or had worked in fitness for my entire childhood, so I was always helping him like clean the machines, put out flyers, all those things. And it was tough. I mean, it was tough in Washington D.C. What were the challenges you faced working and setting up one in Alaska? Like,
okay, so yeah, Homer, Alaska is a town of 5,000. So the pool of like available students and clients is really small, and also Homer itself doesn't have like a real self-defense need here because we're a small community at the very end of the Kenai Peninsula. So there isn't like this drive and necessity for personal protection because we just don't have a lot of crime. I mean, we've had some here recently in the past couple of years, but there just isn't like a societal cultural necessity here. And a bigger part about what I ran into with like combat sports and coaching is we don't have an athletic commission in Alaska. We're like one of two states that don't actually have a proper boxing commission.
really?
Yeah, it's because of population and distance between places. So with that, any pro fighting is semi-pro, but it still counts as pro. But with that, there's not a lot of like athletics that is really. I mean, there's a lot of athletes in Alaska, but because the population is small, there isn't a lot. And with that, there isn't like this drive and need for a lot of athletes to stay in Alaska. They end up leaving in the long run. So, and that was one of the bigger challenges I ran into is just population base and end goal and result for an athlete, because ultimately they always leave. So in the case of here in Homer, it always ends up being like a hobbyist approach, a small group approach, very much like the old tribal backyard community where this is a group of friends doing it, but really being the professional martial artist is really tricky because just there isn't really a need, and not so much a need. There just isn't like a market for it necessarily. But I mean, it also gives us a lot of opportunity to just like create a great program. Again?
I know. I remember my dad would always tell me, he said one of the biggest problems for any gym is longevity of members. Memberships, people come and go. The busiest times of a gym's life is the first of the year, and usually sometime around the summertime. That's when those numbers increase. But also, when do you see all the gyms lose people? February, March. As soon as they forget about the New Year's resolutions, they all get quiet again. So, but especially in a town of only 5,000, man, that's a tough clientele to keep a hold of.
Oh yeah, and it's actually the other way around for us, because summertime, because our core, just like any successful martial arts academy, is always kids. So when summer was out, the gym was vacant. The dojo was vacant because everybody was off in Alaska doing stuff. Plus, during the summer, with the older crowd and the teenagers, they're off fishing, they're off working. So the summertime was really our slowest times, and the school years where we were successful. So. But yeah, it's just market is a big deal when it comes to success in any business. It was harder here in Homer. So realistically, starting a gym here in Homer and an academy in Homer with the idea of being a long-term commercial entity was a bad business plan. So, oh well, I tried.
And it's, everyone says things are a failure, things are a success. I believe in, like, how do you quantify a success? I mean, you seemed like you were very happy. You seem like you built up a following from it all. So, I mean, would you still call what you did a success?
Success as a result of failure. So here's the thing: I embrace failure absolutely at this point because failure is part of the process, messy and everything. But from failure is where you learn. And so, like from fighting, so I fought a lot. I was a mediocre boxer. I was a mediocre taekwondo fighter. I was just mediocre all the way around. I was tough. I was stupid. Um, but the fact is, I fought a lot, but I lost a lot. And from it, I learned a lot about myself, fighting in general. And I also learned that like the way that I fight just doesn't work in a lot of ways. So like fighting heavy and short, like a Filipino in any boxing approach, I should, and because I'm 5'6", I should have fought at 145 pounds, maybe 165 pounds. But I insisted upon fighting at 195 to 205 and being tough and dumb. So a lot of failure there figuring that out 20 years later. But the point being is, uh, doing that process, failing at all that, I figured out things that worked for me. And just like the thing with the failure of the gym and the programs, it's like, well, failure is part of the process. And as a result of it, it's given me the opportunity to really focus on taking that failure, taking that pain, and turning it into a purpose and finding some means of success as a result of it. And that success is I'm ultimately happier in the end. My marriage and my kids are strong, and I'm in a better place having realized that business is not my thing. Martial arts is my thing to a point, but business is not. But it required me to go try it and fail at it, and now I'm doing a different thing about it. So,
Well, and ultimately, from what I understand from a lot of the guys I've gotten to speak with, I don't have this blessing yet, but I'm working on it.
yeah,
Family comes first. If your family is
absolutely.
not set in the right, if your family's out of order, then you probably shouldn't be setting up a gym type stuff.
Yeah, yeah,
Glad to see that glad to see your family's doing good. Glad to hear that your personal life became, not saying it wasn't already successful, became happier, if you will, I guess. Maybe, I don't know if that was the case or not, but you learned lessons, which I think is another big thing about the FMA culture that we can both get into more. Going back to the toxicity of it all, people have a hard time learning from their failures, I feel like, in martial arts as a whole, because they refuse to see it as a learning experience. They only see it as a failure. You know, oh, I screwed up. I didn't win that fight, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. When in reality, we should be looking at our failures like a chance to be successful.
yeah. Learning hard lesson. Oh, I dropped there for a moment. So,
Oh, you're good now.
okay. So yeah, we were saying like failure is intrinsic part of the community, and hard lessons. Yeah, hard lessons are. If we don't have hard lessons and if we don't have adversity, how are we going to have success? I mean, resiliency in the end is a result of facing adverse conditions and situations. So we just need them to grow. So, and the thing that I'm finding with like the FMA community is they're facing some adversity, and a lot of it from internal. And we have an opportunity to really grow. And this is where like situations like people having the very public conversations about the success and growth of FMA, what it's doing, and as uncomfortable as it is for some of the gatekeepers in the community of the old generation, is that it's testing and challenging the narrative and the rhetoric. And if we don't challenge the rhetoric, we're going to be stagnant and we're going to be obscure and then we're going to be lost to history. So we need to have some internal discussions as a community. We need to have some challenges to that rhetoric. So we just don't fade away. And there is like this generational friction between those actively and openly talking about some of the more interesting things about our art and challenging some of the old school dogma. So,
What is, in your opinion, what is an example of an old school dogma or an old school rhetoric that you think is a negative to the culture? Like, what do you think is holding us back, so to speak?
Relying on the success and combat effectiveness of a generation that was 100 years ago. Purely from a militaristic standpoint, purely from combat. This idea of battle tested. Okay, it is elements and skill sets were, yes, battle tested, fighting in the jungles against the Japanese, fighting against the Americans, fighting against anybody in the Philippines in our historical context of edged weapon work when it came to our indigenous fighting methodologies. And that happened 100 years ago. Some of it still happens today. But this idea of battle tested based upon 100 years ago, the scope and landscape of combat in general has changed, especially when you're dealing with the Western approach, say like here in America. Okay, warfare, especially with the GWAT, 20 years of the global war on terror, we've gotten really good. I mean, the Americans have been very good at combat for generations, but with 20 years of war in the Middle East, we've gotten really, really good at warfare. And there's things that are successful within FMA, and there are certain things that just aren't. And what is made successful is the fact that we have a lot of data proving what does work in the current landscape of war, that isn't relying upon the rhetoric and skill sets of generations before. You actually have men and women testing this stuff now, using it now in a modern application, and they're finding holes in some of the rhetoric. Likely point in cases, for a lot of Westerners, we're dealing with an urban setting. We're not fighting in the jungle. So some of the approaches are slightly different. The likelihood of us carrying a large ass bolo in the middle of downtown is very unrealistic. The likelihood of us carrying a pair of sticks and a bolo is very unrealistic. What is realistic in the modern scope of combatives and self defense and personal protection and warfare is carrying a handgun and carrying a knife. So that right there challenges the issue about battle tested. And it really depends on the context too, because what is the term when we talk about battle tested? Are we talking about a charge of Japanese coming down a jungle mountainside, and you have a line of Filipinos fighting as guerrillas? I mean, yeah, that's battle tested, but in the modern scope here in the West, in 2023, the methods for that style of combat doesn't really apply to your average practitioner, especially if they're not a soldier, especially if they're not LEO, especially if they're not in like a combative centric profession. So that right there, that relying on the glory and value of combat on other people is a little tricky. And the other one too I run into is like this whole idea of pressure testing and fighting. It's like one of the best ways to pressure test and learn fighting is actually to go fight. And part of that is like go do combat sports. Go jump in the ring, go do some amateur boxing, go do some amateur MMA, and understand like the process of struggle leading up to it, and the combat aspect of your combat sport, I should say, that active physical struggle of somebody actually trying to cave your face in. I mean, understand that context and have that honesty to it, because there's a lot of like the misunderstanding about FMA because we deal with sticks, knives, and swords that we're always deadly all the time. It's like, well, some of the time maybe, because if you have someone who's gonna smash you into the pavement with like a suplex, I mean, best of luck. So we got actually people who actually fight all the time. They also know how to fight, and and there's a lot of FMA that I'm starting to see like this interesting divergence. This is what I was talking about, being stagnant and potentially obscure. There's a lot of like FMA purist lineages that have done a lot of the stick sparring and the controlled environment stuff, but they haven't actually branched out to this world of combat sports, and so they don't actually fight. You end up with stick fighting tournaments. I'm not crapping on stick fighting tournaments because it's all good, but you have this idea, just like point sparring back in the early 2000s and the 90s, is it's a game of tag, but without any real intrinsic risk of somebody smashing your face into the mat or smashing their face with a knee or an elbow. There's a different level of intensity that keeps things honest by doing it that way. And this is where like Dog Brothers is a big deal. Dog Brothers keeps FMA really, really honest. And this is where, again, this idea of battle tested, it's like, well, battle tested in context as to the individual is battle tested, because a lot of it is it the person or is it the system? And the fact is the system is made up of a bunch of personalities. So the person might be a phenomenal athlete who is utilizing uh, stuff from the curriculum, but it doesn't necessarily mean that the curriculum itself is 100%, because it's
Yeah.
really it's the 1% who are the warriors, and the nine and like the 10% within them that could become that. But the majority of practitioners out there, regardless of what system they are hobbyists. So unless
Mhm.
your job is to do that, just like combat sports, the majority of people who go to a boxing gym, not everybody is a pro. You know, the majority of them are just there to get in shape. So, and that's
Yeah.
okay. It's just you run into like everybody wants to be the 1%, but the likelihood of them becoming that is very unlikely. And just the same as like the actual testing, the actual combat testing of our skill sets as FMA practitioners is very unlikely. Because if it was consistent and all the time, we need to change our life because we're in a very dangerous life. So, and thus back to the rubber chicken, like this whole idea of like I'm drilling knife work all the time, like this idea of preparing for war. It's like, well, am I really, or is it just because I like knives? And so with that, keeping the honesty of I like doing the flows with the rubber chicken because I'm not preparing for war. I just like this movement. This movement is healthy. It's fun. It's good for my brain. But I'm not going to use it in war because the likelihood is if I'm using this in war, I'm already in a shitty situation because I'm in war. I'm having to use this in a combat situation where my life is threatened. And if I'm having to use edged weapons in a active modern combat zone, it's even worse off for me because I've already messed up on all the combat skill sets and TTPs and all those things that is intrinsic to modern warfare. So back to battle tested, if you're using edged weapons in mass form in a modern combat scenario where we have guns, knives, and bombs, I mean, it's a bad day for everybody.
Yeah.
So, and like I said, just having honest conversations about the realistic approach to how FMA can be used, because there's a lot of fantasy out there and a lot of delusions. But I mean, you have quite a few people who actually do use this intelligently, and it's just there is resistance between people who think and because they want and they believe versus people who actually do, and trying to figure out who is who and that internal system of like the person figuring out if I'm this or I'm that that part is hard, and that's where a lot of ego comes into play. So I don't know. I talk about this stuff a lot, um, but
It
I don't know
shows.
how
You're
long.
very.
Yeah.
It shows though. Like you're clearly well versed in this topic, and also I think that you have a unique perspective. One from a martial artist, two from a professional fighter, three from a combat veteran. Like you've seen. Uh,
Let's be clear. I'm not a combat veteran. I'm a veteran who served in a time of war, but I actually never made it overseas. I never made it to
okay.
Iraq or Afghanistan. I made it to Korea, I made it to Japan, but I never spent in 20 years of the GWAT and 11 years of my service just by circumstance of my MOS and the units I was in. I actually never made it to Afghanistan or Iraq. I want to be very clear on that. Because there's a lot of people in the FMA community and just community in general who said, I'm a combat veteran or I'm a veteran, take me as my value because I'm a veteran. I know better. It's like that's part of that issue about the ego. So yeah, yeah.
Huh. Well, my mistake on misspeaking,
No, it's good.
but
It's good.
and I still think that you do offer very unique perspectives, and I think that this is one of the topics that I've gotten into some heat with in the past because like at a lot of seminars, my dad does this thing, and I started saying this now in my classes, like it's totally okay for you to do FMA
Hmm.
purely for fun. You
Hmm.
don't need to try to do this to learn how to be the best stick fighter or best knife fighter. I'm oddly enough, I'm doing a Dog Brothers sparring event tomorrow in Central Florida, and
Nice.
I've learned that, and this is going to offend some people probably. I think full contact knife fighting is utterly stupid
Yeah.
because it
Yeah.
would never happen that way. Like,
No.
well, I'm sure he'd be a full contact knife fighter. I did this last year with a guy, and we went at it. And, like, I cut him 6 times in the face and in the neck, but he kept charging at me because we don't respect the weapon because to us it's still sparring. So what
Yep.
I did instead is I punched him in the mouth and he stopped coming at me.
Yep.
And
The
that's
risk
where
isn't real.
yeah.
Yeah.
Where I think that, and I did a lot of Taekwondo point sparring as a kid. I think full contact stick fighting can teach you some more things if you go with less pads and use the full get up, because you'll learn to respect the weapon a little more. Whereas knife fighting, full contact knife fighting, if anything should be point fighting, it should be knife fighting.
Yeah, absolutely.
You're trying to get that 1-2 combination of a knife, and that's it. You wouldn't
Yeah.
try to exchange with a knife.
Oh yeah, no. So I actually just did a video recently with Cooper about like my issues with Daga y Espada and playing with a rubber knife and a rattan stick. The two things that I figured out is, one, I don't like doing Daga y Espada for sparring with a rubber knife and a stick, mainly because you don't respect the rubber knife. You respect the stick. And that's the second part, is that the stick is always a threat. The risk is always real with a stick. So, and that ended up being like, from the idea that Doggy Espada is dealing with the dangerous weapon is the knife. You're supposed to respect the knife, but if the knife isn't really a threat, you're not going to focus on it. And the stick is always a threat no matter what. So if you change it up with maybe a rubber knife and a rubber stick, there might be some value in understanding the lessons there. But still, you're not going to actually kill anybody with a rubber knife. I mean, it's going to be really hard if you did, and interesting. But the risk isn't real. What is always real when you're dealing with any of those rubber situations is catching an elbow to the face, getting choked out, those actual physical human contact situations. Because in the other aspect, so having not been to war, I've seen a lot of violence and been involved in a lot of violence, both in participation and receiving of it. And I've been stabbed a couple of times. And the thing with it is, it wasn't a knife duel. I got stabbed in the leg with a craft knife. I got stabbed in the chest with a razor blade, one of those break off little razor blades that you see with box cutters. Yeah. And the other one time is I got stabbed and slashed with a broken beer bottle. There was no point sparring. There was no like exchange to it. It was ambushed and in a crowd. And there was really no way to emphasize or express my Filipino martial arts in those three situations. And that's part of the delusion that I find within the FMA community, is this idea of, again, battle tested. It's like, well, let's actually look at how knives are really used. And the fact is, we're not running around with a big ass bolo. The people who actually stab each other are using little innocuous blades that are easily disposable, for one, because it's just what's there and available. And also is the criminal mentality of, if they're going to use it, they're going to get rid of it. And there isn't like this emotional value of a really expensive knife and using it, because one, you paid money for it, and two, if you use it and it gets confiscated from you, you're out on that. And on top of all that, if you're actually going to use it as a criminal, they don't want something that ties them back to it. So it's easier to use something that is quick and disposable and innocuous and move on. And that has been my experience, and a lot of the experiences for these people who've actually seen a lot of real street violence in that regard, is that it's not the $100 to $500 knife that stabs you. It's the little 20-cent razor blade, or the $5 knife that you pick up at the gas station.
Yeah.
So.
And I think that is, and this all comes back to which I think I'm going to call this the topic of the video, is like, I'll find a way to, but it's like, the seriousness of FMA is ruining us in some ways, which, we've seen so many people who, all these titles, all these accolades, all these other things, which I'm not disrespecting titles, I'm not disrespecting rank, because I do think those things are well earned, and that they mean that rank is important. Obviously, it's important to have a hierarchical structure, but I also believe that if you're, this is going to sound offensive, and I don't mean for it to be entirely, but if you're being referred to by your title as an expectation off the mat, come on, bro. Like, on the mat, I got no problem calling you that. You deserved it. You've earned it. But my dad's the first one to say this, and I keep harking back to him because he's an example I try to follow. First off, he hates the title Grandmaster. He wished he'd never been called it.
Yeah,
and
fair.
Off the mat, he just wants to be called Bruce. We're getting dinner tickets, call him Bruce. He despises being bowed and kowtowed to like that when it's off the mat. And even on the mat, he's like, you guys can call me Bruce, because it's to him and to all of us, as it should be, it's a familial thing. It's a family style. It's an
Yep.
art that is designed to be inclusive, not exclusive like the older styles, the older, no disrespect to the karate styles. I've done karate, I love it. But when you
Hmm.
have to spend the first 10 minutes of class bowing to a picture, it's like, well, come on now. Like,
Yeah.
we should pay reverence and respect, obviously, but we're doing something fun. We're not trying to be in a cult.
Yeah. Yeah. Knife
Yeah.
cults. That's a fun conversation.
Oh god, that'll be another episode we got to do.
Yeah. Well, yeah,
Well,
no, like this idea of bowing to rank. Here's the fact. I mean, two stories here. For one, in the very practical sense, the blade doesn't care about your rank because we all bleed the same. Okay, so the blade doesn't care, nor does a bullet. Bullet doesn't care how badass you are. Because the fact is, as we have found with the GWAT, is that a dude in behind the door with a dish cook can wipe out a SEAL team. Okay, because it's happened. A 12-year-old kid with an RPG can wipe out a SEAL team. These are badass warriors. Okay, it just can. The weapon system does not care. So just the same, going back into history, this is what Japan dealt with the transition of the samurai and the rise of firearms usage in Japan. Is you have these peasants who have maybe 12 weeks worth of training in line with firearms, taking on these samurai who have been dedicated their entire life, in essence, to warfare, to the usage of the sword and all things warrior-like. But the bullet did not care, regardless if it came out of a samurai's rifle or out of a peasant who just got thrown in their arms and say, "Hey, point and shoot." So, and that's that. The truth of the matter is, regardless of how trained you are, the things that actually kill you don't care. Don't care
oh yeah.
about your rank. Don't care about anything. I mean, I talk about in my own doctrine about a number of F's that are keeping clear as to like the honesty. And the big one, and this one's going to be fun for the internet, is fucked and failed beyond your control. Okay, you can be a ninja, you can be all these things, you can be a SEAL team member, you can be all these things, but if you get caught with an RPG, if you get caught with a meteor, if you get caught with an asteroid, you get caught walking across the street and getting ran the fuck over, it doesn't care how skillful you are. There's always that failure or just getting fucked beyond your control. It's just that is the factor that people have to keep in mind. And we're constantly trying to prepare ourselves to like mitigate all the other stuff, but there's always just things that we can't control. And this is where the ego and the delusion comes in mind of like, I'm a warrior every day. And I can do anything because I'm a warrior. It's like, no, you can't. And people need to realize that. And this is the issue, like with FMA, and mainly because we're talking about FMA. It's just like the idea of that because we're FMA, we're masters of the knife. It's like, well, the knife isn't unique to the Philippines.
It was
The
the
knife
first
is
tool
unique.
ever created by man. Yeah.
Exactly. So everybody has learned how to kill each other a long time ago. It's just because we specify that we are knife experts. The Filipino martial arts community, have this idea that we are that we are perfect with the knife, and that's a problem.
You just gave me an idea for an episode at some point. This might get really offensive to some
Yeah.
people. Did FMA over mysticize the knife?
Oh, absolutely.
Like we made it sound like it's like we make it sound like FMA guys are the best knife tacticians in the world. Granted, so does every other system that claims to teach knife. Wait, I
Yeah,
think you're dead
agriculture
on though.
does.
The knife doesn't care what system it is.
That's correct.
You know, and I teach it this way, where there's only 3 types of strikes in the world with a stick or anything, even with a knife. There's a forehand strike, a backhand strike, and some sort of thrust.
Yep.
That's pretty much it. Now, whether
Yep.
it's a double-edged knife, a single-edged knife, a spoon, a fork, you're only going to get hit with an object one of those 3 ways.
Yep.
That's not culturally specific. That's not system specific. That's not regional or Filipino island specific. It's just the reality of it all. And I
Yep.
think that we've ruined and we've over mysticized the knife when in reality, so many people have no idea what they're talking about. I'm not
Yep.
saying I'm not claiming to be an expert or a master. I've just seen a lot of
Yep.
knife videos online. We've all seen those videos where it's like, oh yeah, this is the one and only true knife defense. I'm like, no, dude. The true knife defense is to not be in that situation.
Yeah.
Situational awareness will save your ass more than any punching or blocking you'll ever learn.
Absolutely. So, like, here's the funny part, and this is outside FMA. This is just the scope of martial arts in general. I'm of the belief that we are constantly trying to chase after like the perfect technique that our martial arts progenitor figured out. Who like he or she was in a perfect scenario where they were able to pull off something that was unique to them and the scenario. And then the story gets told about that specific punch, that specific kick, whatever specific technique that was the technique that won, and it was unique to them because there's a story attached to it. And us participating in a system years later are constantly chasing after that that specific technique. And when in reality is that was just something unique to the person who did it at the time, and with the right situation.
Yeah.
And I think that's the case with, and back to FMA, is like FMA at its heyday, and historically, because it's just been so intrinsic to like the history of our rebellious nature as Filipinos. So, but there's, I mean, like I said, there's so many other cultures in the world because the fact is the knife is not unique to the Philippines. The knife is unique to humanity. It's just the other one too is marketing. The Filipinos love to market that is something unique to them, which is okay because I mean
whatever helps sell DVDs
Yeah.
or classes, and I get that. And I hope I'm not trying. I hope people hear. I'm not trying to dissuade people from learning knife stuff. I think everyone should learn knife stuff, and I do think, by and large, maybe I'm biased, the FMA community has some of the more practical knife training I've seen.
Yeah.
Not saying it's foolproof because, shoot, the only thing foolproof is a 45 caliber hollow point against a knife.
Yeah.
That'll put a stop to. That's real Largo fighting that I like. But this has been a fun conversation, Kurt, and I think we've really, and I enjoy talking about the culture of FMA and hearing what other people think. Also, I'm a big fan of how you've decided that your goal is to bring about the disillusion of seriousness. Like, people take themselves way too seriously in this community, and that's a crime. Like, when I first hooked up with this group nearby where I'm training with, and they let me rent out a space at their dojo, I invite them to seminars, invite them to these things, and they're like, we're not really big on seminars because it's just not our thing. And and as I've gotten to know them more, they told me, oh, we had bad experiences with the guys who were super serious. They didn't let people have fun. They charged just X, Y, and Z. And I'm like, then that, in my opinion, you didn't go to a real Filipino seminar.
Yeah.
At least definitely not one of ours. Like, I went to one, and this guy was super serious. He was holding it in the chieftain's pose. He was saying how his system was the true killing art, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. They skipped lunch, which I thought was a travesty. And I was exactly. If you're a Filipino seminar and you don't have food, you're heretics.
Yeah.
But we need to bring about the community aspect, the fun aspect. That's how you keep the art alive, in my opinion. If you're going to pick a side between seriousness and family style, you can't just stick up your ass. You got to have fun. That's the way the art lives.
Yeah. I mean, it's a lot to ask. Okay, it's a lot to ask the dojo mom to say, "Hey, I want to put my son or my daughter into a Filipino martial arts academy," especially when it's tacticaled out, plate carriers, and mismatched camo. Okay, it's a lot to ask. So the way you make it approachable is you make it approachable by making it fun. And then as they grow, if they ever grow up to be that 1% of the community who actually will be a lifelong participant with all these skill sets in mind, that's great. But the majority of the people, you have to make it approachable. And the way you do that is by making it fun. Because if you don't, you're losing out on everything. And you're losing out on a lot of potentiality for, one, great students and great connections, and also losing out on the opportunity of like expanding and expressing your art and sharing it with the world. So, and this is where the problem we run into with the Filipino martial arts community is this idea that the Filipino martial arts community can only be like the tactical community. Okay, that's a problem. That is a very specific group of individuals in profession that will actually use it for that purpose. The majority of martial artists are not part of the tactical community. The majority
of be part of it.
That is correct. So with that, we have to make it approachable of like saying, hey, that's something you can be, but the reality is we're going to have fun. And if you want to become that, there is a means and method, and I may not be the means and method, but there is a means and method to becoming that. But this idea that it has to be tactical all the time, that doesn't work. It does not work for the soccer mom coming in to the dojo. It just doesn't. So, and this is where that mindset of the Filipino martial arts community and any other martial arts community, but specifically the FMA community, because we deal with knives specifically, that we need to like step back, think about what we're actually teaching and whom we're actually teaching it to. So, yeah, this has been a great conversation.
Well, we'll have to do another one, and I've got some ideas for topics and questions for later episodes. But
Sweet.
I want to thank you, one, for setting all this up, because I've never used this program before. I owe you one, Kurt. Before we end it, I always like to give the people a chance to promote their stuff, social media, events, whatever you got going on. So please pimp yourself out.
Oh yeah, so I have a whole bunch of social media nonsense. I will throw it up here on the screen here. Yeah, so I'm not teaching professionally anymore. I don't have a gym anymore. But I do have some content. You can definitely find me online in a few places, but I'll throw that up there right now.
Oh,
Yeah.
professional stuff.
Yeah, so you can find me all there. Yeah. And wherever this gets posted, I'll definitely throw my little links on there.
Absolutely.
But the other one too is if people really want to like come up and play, they're more than welcome to. But I do make it down south at least twice a year. I'll be down at the West Coast Blintlock camp there in Marysville, Washington, here in August, and I'll also be at Water and Steel with Dr. Kelly. So yeah, so I'll be down if people want to link up and actually put a face to the rubber clucker. So yeah. Yeah.
I'm gonna go buy some of these and try some tactical fighting at the Dog Brothers event, maybe.
You should. I mean, the funny thing is, what I'm seeing is a number of people are now just tagging me and showing me like photos of the way they're using the rubber chicken, and it's great. If that is my primary contribution to the FMA community, I'll be a happy man. So yeah.
All right, man. It's been fun. We'll talk some more. Everyone, again, please go like, follow, subscribe, check him out. Check out the Rubber Collector. Talented martial artist, great conversationalist, and I think another voice in the FMA community that I know I'm a young guy, but I can say this with some authority. The man gets it. This is one of those cool guys I've gotten to meet that's not a complete douchebag tool who thinks FMA is about killing, et cetera, and it's his way and no way, because those people get boring after a while listening to them. They all say the same thing.
Well, to be fair, I used to be that guy, and then I grew up.
Well, I'm glad that you did, because we've had great conversations because of that. And the more voices we have that are inclusive, the better the art will continue.
Yeah.
So, thank you again for coming on the show, or I guess thank you again for setting up this show. And also, talk about your show, because I saw that you have a guest coming up soon. I don't know when this will get posted, but you do your own show with Brian.
Yeah,
right?
So we have Taylor O'Donnell coming on Friday, talking about what it's like to be a woman's wrestler in a men's game, and breaking down a lot of those barriers. Cool thing about Taylor is she was part of the 2004 Olympic team, and setting records as a female wrestler in Alaska, because I mean Alaska's community and athletics is really small.
Yeah.
And the percentage of female wrestlers is even smaller. And she's been a huge voice and advocate for women's athletics and the growth and necessity of that. So I'll have a fun conversation with her on Friday. So
that's awesome, man.
Yeah.
And especially, wrestling is, in my opinion, one of the toughest things in the world.
Yeah, I really wish I got into it when I was younger. I didn't really grow to appreciate it until I got into jiu-jitsu, and since then I've been trying knees, broken ankles, and everything, trying to pursue more of it. But yeah, it is definitely one of the tenets of combat sports, or just combat in general, that anybody should adapt. Just like boxing, you just need to have it to be a well-rounded fighter. So, and the other thing about like the Fight House podcast, the cool thing is what it is we're having candid conversations about life, violence, and martial arts. So it's not specific to any particular style, and it gives us an opportunity to actually dive into a conversation. So I've been really enjoying those.
I've been loving it, and I think it's a great idea. So keep it up, brother.
Sweet.
All right. Chris Chiu, Martial Arts Nomad, Arnis International. Another episode of Karpool Kali from across the country.
Yeah.
With some minor technical difficulties, because that's the nature of my shows. It's the nature of what we do.
Yep.
Well, great talking to you, Kurt.
All right, then. All right.
Have a good one.
See you, man.